Hola, buenas tardes.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to a new Enfoca meeting. My name is Pepe Naranjo. I'm a journalist based in Dakar in Senegal from El País and host of this meeting organized by Doctors Without Borders, in which we will talk about sub-Saharan Africa, women, documentary, photography, and a different perspective at the continent, like the one that our guest brings, our Nigerian photographer Nyancho NwaNri. Nyancho's work revolves around history, culture, and spiritual traditions, as well as social and environmental issues. Her work has been exhibited both in her native Nigeria and outside his country. She has been awarded the Reuters Yanis Barakis Fellowship in 2021. She has been a finalist for the Art X Prize 2021 and shortlisted for the Welcome Photography Prize 2020. Her documentary works have appeared in publications such as the New York Times, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, Reuters, and Geographical Magazine. She's also an educator and gives training courses, workshops, and talks on film and photography throughout Africa. We will share 35 minutes of conversation. You can send your questions for Nyancho through the chat that we have enabled. We will try to answer some of them throughout the meeting. Without further ado, I'll get Nyancho NwaNri from Lagos, Nigeria. Good afternoon, Nyancho.
Thank you so much, Pepe. Good afternoon, good evening to
Yo,
everyone. Thank you to the
lo
MSF
primero que
team.
me gustaría es conocerte un poco
What I
mejor.
would like to do is to get to know you. How did you start? Were you self-taught? How did you learn? What was your beginning? What was your journey like?
Well, photography for me started before I realized it. I remember when I was much younger in secondary school, my father bought these disposable film cameras and gave them to me, and I would take them to school, take pictures of my friends, my schoolmates. I was in the band. I would make pictures of the band as well, just pictures of the environment, and I started from there, kept it going until I got into uni. Became a hobby, and then at one point, I think in about 2016 or 2017, I decided to quit working and focus on being a full-time freelance professional photographer.
Tú te defines, entre otras cosas, como
You
lens.
define yourself as a lens-based artist. Could you please let us know a little bit what it means? And also one of your characteristics is the importance you grant the cultural investigation, cultural research. How does photography affect your investigations and your research on cultures?
So, as a lens-based artist, I practice not only documentary photography, I practice video art as well. So my work kind of has two branches. There's the documentary aspect and there's the art aspect as well. And yes, I am a cultural researcher. I conduct a lot of research into our indigenous cultures and traditions here on the continent, on the African continent. And I would say that being a photographer, for me, it's a plus in a way. It adds to the research because when I go out in the field, when I go on trips and I'm asking questions, I'm aware enough to apply photography as a means of documenting the findings I'm getting in my research. So they really do work in tandem. They go very well hand in hand, and each one kind of complements the other.
Días antes de este encuentro Enfoca.
Several days before this meeting, we offer the viewers the opportunity to select via Instagram two of your portfolios, turning trash into cash and Gedu. And with 60% of the votes, turning trash into cash was selected. So could you please explain to us how was this to work, specifically in Lagos, on urban waste management for profit?
It was a very interesting project. Funny enough, I've actually documented this particular organization twice, and each time it's really amazing to see the way they work, the kind of model they apply towards waste management in Lagos, because it's quite unique. They focus on involving members of the community in waste management and making it something that they profit from, as a way to create that buy-in, to make people really interested in, managing waste, and by some like as a byproduct also alleviating the dangers of improper waste management to our environment, to climate, and all that. So it has been an amazing project for me to see how this has been applied, to see the buy-in that comes from the community members, because there's a lot of people involved in this project. They really take it seriously. I've been able to go around with them around the communities to see people submitting their, like handing in the recyclables they've collected, the volume of recyclables they collect, and understanding how that impacts the community. That now there's this awareness that's been created, that not only is it good to manage your waste, to dispose of your waste properly, to engage in recycling and better, cleaner environmental habits, it can also be profitable to you financially, health-wise, because your environment remains cleaner, mentally, because you're in a better, a cleaner environment. It keeps you more relaxed, more at ease, that sort of thing.
Imagino que la gestión.
Well, I can imagine that waste management in a city like Lagos, that it's a mega city, it is quite complex, right? Most likely you had to go very deep into very difficult elements, right?
Waste management definitely is complex in Lagos. It still requires a lot of work. It still requires a lot of work for us to get to the level where it's seamless, where we're not having to deal with landfill issues and clogging of the gutters and waterways, that sort of thing. So I think organizations like this, like Recyclers, which I documented in this project, Turning Trash into Cash, are very important. We need to see more of these organizations coming up, not just relinquishing the responsibility to the waste management authorities, which of course it is their responsibility, but like I said before, creating that buy-in, that ownership with the community members, to understand that waste management is a joint venture, it's a collaboration. So it can't just be dispose of the waste however you want to and expect the authorities to deal with it, but we all have to play our part. So we need more of these organizations coming up, taking up the mantle as well.
Y además lo estamos viendo, ¿no?
And we are seeing that in your images, there is a strong presence of women. Women make up to 60% of the workers at the recycling company. What do you think this is so? Why do you think that women's presence is so important in this sector?
So from speaking to the founder of this organization, Recyclers, is actually founded by a woman and co-run by her and her brother. And the idea here, as she says, was to kind of empower women to, because if you look at, let me say, jobs like this that seem to be very labor intensive or very involved, generally such fields are kind of dominated by men. You see more men in these fields, construction sites, waste management, these kinds of projects. But for them, they felt like it's important to bring women in, to kind of empower the women, and also to bring in that female aspect of that. There's a certain take on management and how do I explain it? Bring that touch in. What they do is they make the women handle the sorting, clearing, gathering of the material and all that. And then the baling is done by the men, as you see in the picture here, the baling and the weighing and all that. So you have that more detailed, more fine-tuned, maybe not more, but a detailed, fine-tuned approach to sorting the recyclables, which the women have, and also to kind of empower women in an industry that's more dominated by men. So even in other ranks as well, the project managers, the hub managers, you see a lot of women factor in or present in the organization as well, which I think is really good.
Bueno, las fotografías en general, ¿no?
So the pictures in general, and the ones that we have just seen, have a huge capacity to communicate, right? But sometimes pictures are just like a frame. We cannot see the entire context, right? So we'll address what we see and what we don't see in one of your pictures.
Okay.
In the context, what is outside the focus. For instance, we'll see an image, and tell us, please, what is behind this image that we are seeing here on the screen.
Okay, so this is a portrait of Ahmed. With portraits, what I try to do, the way I approach portraiture is I try to capture images that really speak to who a person is, that really capture the essence of a person in that particular moment. And this picture here, I would say what you don't see is not necessarily physical, because sometimes we always think about images in the physical sense, what we see with our eyes, but there are also things that happen when you look at an image, there's connection. And for me, in my photography, that's what I always aim for. The most important aspect of photography for me is the human connection. So in an image like this, for example, I'm trying to capture the intimacy of that moment, the feeling. Here he is laying on the floor of the deck of a ship, and he's laid down covered with his blanket up to here. And I look in his eyes and I'm wondering what's going through his mind, you know? And I asked him that question, like, when you lay down here and sleep at night, what do you think of? What comes to your mind? And the handwritten notes you saw there was his response. And he said something like, I'm trying to sleep, but it feels like I'm in a dream. I've aged, but I wish I didn't age. He talks about his fears, his worries. He talks about his mother, how he feels, that sort of thing. So for me, what you're getting, the extra thing you're getting from this image is that connection, that intimate connection, that bond, the essence of who Ahmed is as a person.
Precisamente hace unas semanas estuviste...
A week ago, you were in the End, is the MSF rescue ship, right, in the Mediterranean, together with Iranian photographer Maska Islami. You made your work, the name is Tales of Women at Sea, that focus both on rescued women and on the men who left a woman behind and their connection with that woman in particular. Could you please explain a little bit how was that work? And from a personal perspective, how did you feel in that moment, which is quite dramatic, right, for so many people?
It was really a profoundly moving experience for me to be on the rescue ship, to take part in the rescues as well, to come in contact with people that are so open, not just the MSF staff themselves who were wonderful, but the survivors as well, people who have gone through so much, but approach you with such warmth and openness that they would literally give you the shirt off their backs, even if it's the only thing they have, just to show you how much they were grateful, how much they were thankful, how much they appreciated you. It was really an atmosphere of such deep connection, deep human connection. And for me, it was really a privilege to be able to experience that, a privilege to be able to be given the access to tell their stories, to hear their stories, for them to open up to me and let me into their world that way.
¿Y cuál fue tu enfoque? ¿Cuál fue
And what was your angle, your approach, and what have you wanted to convey with these images?
So the key for me here, like you mentioned earlier, was the focus was on the general focus of the project was on women making the crossing, right, through the Mediterranean Sea, coming through from Libya through the Mediterranean Sea to get to Europe. But my aspect of the project focused on men and drawing that link between the men and the women who they've left behind, because a lot of these men, some of them are doing this, making the journey for maybe to help their mothers or their sisters, any female loved ones that they have back home. So for me, I took a stance of really exploring that emotional connection, exploring that the bond there, the human aspect of it, rather than focusing on the facts of what had happened to them, the torture and the violence and that sort of thing that they had gone through. I took a different approach to it, which is what you will see if you go through the project.
¿Y crees que como
Do you think that as an African documentary photographer, your perspective has been different to the one that an European photographer could have on the same topic?
Oh, absolutely. I definitely think that as an African photographer, I'm coming from a different understanding, an understanding of the language, the culture, the habits, an understanding of the nuances with which these things are laced, which is very much different from the understanding that a Western photographer will have. I'm also coming from the perspective of someone that experiences these stories myself as a storyteller and as an African having to consume these stories or read or view these stories. So for me, I'm very conscious of representation, ethics and representation when I approach projects like this, not even just project like this, any project in general, because as an African, we have seen a lot of times where there's a lot of misrepresentation or poor representation because the project has been handled by a Western photographer who doesn't understand the culture, doesn't understand the language, doesn't understand the nuances in behavior. So for someone like me to be the one telling these stories, I'm conscious of that and making sure to represent people, especially people from developing nations, people from the African continent, Black and Indigenous people of color, in the most appropriate light, in the best light possible. For example, we look at, let's say, the issue of white savior imagery now. It's very good that a lot of discussion is going on about it and trying to shift away from that kind of storytelling. So someone like me, coming from being someone that's affected by such form of storytelling, I keep that consciousness when I'm also creating work to ensure that I'm not falling into that method of storytelling. And going even beyond that, you look at, okay, we have the visual side of the story, but there's also the written side of the story, the captions, the texts that follow. How do you represent the people you're speaking about? Again, this goes back to what I mentioned about me shifting away from trauma storytelling, because I find it very harmful to focus on people's trauma, especially in situations like this. They've come out from the trauma. They've left the place. They've left Libya. Allow them to leave Libya. A lot of storytellers or journalists will approach this subject and want to ask questions about that. Oh, what happened to you? What did they do? What did you go through? And keep harping on that, expecting them to keep regurgitating the facts of the trauma and violence that's been inflicted on them. But I ask the question, how many people, how many storytellers have approached such a topic and just asked the people, how are you? A simple, how are you? How do you feel? What's going through your mind? Like I asked Ahmed, when you lay down at night, what are the thoughts that come to you? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? What are your fears? I remember if you look at the main project, there's a Polaroid. No, this was while I was taking the pictures. I was trying to take a picture of a scar that one of the survivors had on his elbow, right? And I took the picture and I looked back at the camera and I was like, maybe the scar is not so visible. Maybe I should make it more prominent. But then going back and talking to him, I asked him a question. I asked, if you were to say something to the people who inflicted this scar on you, what would you say to them? And his response to me was very moving. He said to me, like, pain doesn't kill, so never give up. And in that moment, it made me realize that I was on the right course, because he doesn't see his scars, you know. He doesn't define himself by the trauma or the violence that has been inflicted on him. So why should I, as a storyteller, focus my storytelling on his trauma? The stories I saw on the Geo Barons were stories of hope and resilience and humanity and warmth and openness and kindness being shared among so many people. And that was my focus in the project, to ensure that I stayed true to what I saw there, and I explored a different form of storytelling that will not be harmful, that will ensure that they're represented in the best possible lights. Because even if you think about, okay, you have to raise awareness of what's going on. For me, this is something I'm putting to all storytellers, journalists out there. There are other ways to raise awareness. We don't always have to keep following the same format that we've been doing before, which in the end is harmful to people, you know?
Hablas de historias de amor.
You talk about love stories. We talked about the bond between the men trying to get to Europe and the women who are left behind. But if you think about love stories, do you think about generosity as well? As you said before, are you thinking about women rescuers? You know, you've put your lens on them. So what have they conveyed to you? Why are you focusing on them, on that side of the story?
It was very interesting for me to have these conversations and share this space with the women rescuers as well, the women members of the MSF team. Because like I said before, the kind of exchange I saw between the MSF team and the survivors was it was one that you look at it, and in a way I would step back and think, okay, maybe there is hope for us human beings, you know, seeing people come together in this way and really hold space for one another, really share with one another, really care for one another, from both sides, from the MSF team, especially from the side of the survivors as well. And the women, Kira, for example, who is the midwife, very dedicated, very pays so much attention to detail, to every detail, all the needs of the survivors. She's so attentive with it. Nejma, the cultural mediator as well, she herself is someone that has been in a similar situation. So she has, this also goes back to what you were asking as well about if someone from this side of the world would have a different perspective. So she also brings that perspective as a cultural mediator, as someone that has shared similar experiences. So she really tailors the care she gives to these survivors based on that. You have Lucia as well, who is from another part of the world, but who speaks about how sharing space with these survivors also kind of feeds her energy, like gives her energy to forge forward in life in spite of the traumas that she has had. So you see these connecting stories, people sharing, people recognizing the lines that bind us all together and holding space for one another. And that was the aspect for me I tried to capture with the MSF women.
Y Nyancho, ¿por qué
Nyancho, why did you take Polaroid pictures? Did you think that was the creative approach that best adjusted to your story? What narrative do you think they contributed with?
de los mensajes escritos a mano también, ¿no?
And what about the handwritten messages as well?
So the Polaroid idea was actually initiated by the other photographer, Maka Eslami. She was the one that brought up the idea of writing on the Polaroids, which if you look at the project again, you would see the other side of the women who wrote on the Polaroids. But for me, because I took this approach, like I said, of exploring deeper the human side of the story, the emotional connection, asking them about their feelings and hopes and dreams, I took it a step further, where I figured rather than just get them to write 1 or 2 lines on a Polaroid, I really want them to pour out their hearts which is why I then brought up the idea of doing the handwritten notes, because I felt it was more in-depth, it was more intimate as well. It allows us to explore these survivors even deeper, even more, to find out stories about them, to understand what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and also being able to, for example, if you were to attend an exhibition where you could actually see these handwritten notes from the survivors, it creates a stronger connection. It creates a certain depth to be able to see things written in their own hand, hear things from in their own words, in their own voice as well.
Vamos a dar un salto a otra de tus temáticas.
Let's jump to another one of your topics and works. Let's talk about the Gedu Multimedia Project, where you highlight a worldwide problem, but with a more local approach. Like you were saying in this report, the impact of logging and cutting down trees, that is an alarming issue in Nigeria. Hundreds of thousands of hectares are being lost every year due to logging. Why did you want to do this job? What were your intentions behind it? I imagine there's a concern about climate change and the environmental issues behind it as well.
Yes, it was definitely the concern about the intersection of logging with climate change and environmentalism, which, as you know, Nigeria ranks really high in the world when it comes to deforestation, loss of natural habitat. Last year, we had a lot of flooding around the world. Nigeria had a lot of flooding as well. So for me, this project was trying to look at find a place where all these things meet. So you have where we're cutting down the trees. I'm wondering how it's affecting the environment, how that's feeding into climate change, or is climate change what's feeding into the cutting down of these trees? What's the reason why the trees are being cut down? What effect does that eventually have? If you notice in the pictures, you see that the timber, the logs are transported via waterways. So I'm thinking to myself, if there's an issue, we talk about climate change and rising sea levels, how does that connect with them, the timber workers, the way they're transporting their logs from one state, one part of the country to another? And even in the course of the project, it happened that at a point, they just couldn't do any work because there was no rain. The rains hadn't started, and because they need water, they depend on water for moving the logs. They couldn't move the logs out of the forest, so they had cut down the logs and they were just sitting there in the forest and couldn't be moved. So it was looking at this interplay between deforestation, environmentalism, climate change, rising sea levels, reduced rainfall, and how all of those play together.
Además, fue un trabajo que lo hiciste
This
con la
was also a project that you did in conjunction with Reuters, right? So how do you think that has an influence on your work? Does it affect your angle when working with an international news agency like Reuters?
I'm very happy to say that it didn't affect my angle at all. I really enjoyed working with Reuters on this project. Actually, it was a grant project. So basically, I had the freedom to do whatever I wanted with the project. There was no interference from their side. They weren't trying to push me in a certain direction. It was literally just, okay, here is the grant. We like your idea. We like the idea of this project. We want to see it happen. And I went out and did what I had to do. They were very supportive. The editor, Gabrielle Fonseca Johnson, she was amazing to work with, to be honest. It was a very, shall I say, symbiotic relationship, getting to share with her, see her point of view. Even in the editing process, I was even involved in the editing process. So it was very hands-on. It was very much my gaze, my experience, my storytelling without any interference from Reuters.
Bueno, ha quedado claro
Well,
en Getu tu interés.
it is clear in Getu your interest in the topics of climate change and the environment, and we'll continue with another project of yours, Going Under, which also addresses this topic. It's a photographic project in which you document, as you said before, the continuous adverse effects of flooding in Lagos due to the rise in the sea level and the lack of adequate infrastructure to deal with this phenomenon. But before going into the project, I wanted to ask, why wasn't this released or published? Why?
So this is actually an ongoing project. I've not stopped the project. I'm still shooting.
Okay.
But this is one thing, and I'm actually happy that this happened to me in this project, because a lot of the time, as storytellers, as documentarians, as documentary photographers, we approach an idea and we want to do the project, right? It's our baby. We want to bring it to life. We want to make sure we do it and do it right and see it through to the end. But sometimes that doesn't happen, especially when you're dealing with things as unpredictable as weather, climate change, as we know, is quite unpredictable. It's making things kind of go crazy. So I started this project in 2019. And then unfortunately 2020 came and the pandemic hit, so I was very much restricted.
Claro.
Yes, obviously, with movement, I couldn't visit the community as often as I wanted to. I did make some visits there, but then lockdown came. I couldn't go back out. But in that time, the members of the community found a sort of makeshift way to not solve the problem, but alleviate it a little bit, to kind of tone down the impact of the flooding. So by the time I went back there after the lockdown, after the pandemic had eased, I wasn't seeing the same kind of imagery or the same effects that I saw when I started the project in 2019. However, for me, it doesn't end there. And this is something this is why I said I'm happy this sort of thing happened to me, because I already was looking at it as a long-term project, but it's also put me in that mindset where it forces me to kind of take a step back. So, okay, yes, they've done this thing. It has reduced the flooding a little bit, but it's not the end. I'm waiting to see. I still go back to the community once in a while to find out what's happening, to speak to the people as well, just find out how is it affecting their lives, have things improved. And I intend to maybe in the next year or two go back again and see how it has changed, because climate change is not something you document in a short while, right? We have these pictures now where there's flooding, it's affecting them. You see it in the homes, it's affecting their everyday lives. But I want to see 5 years from now, what has changed? If I go back there, are they still having to employ makeshift methods to address these problems? Or are the authorities and the people in the positions to do something, have they actually done something? Has the infrastructure been provided? Is it being maintained? That sort of thing. So I do have photos of when the flooding had subsided, when they had put in these sort of, I don't know whether to call them barriers or methods to kind of reduce the effect of the flooding. I have some images of that, and I'm going to go back after and continue to look at and examine the situation and how it's progressing, or maybe not progressing.
Sí, al final es lo que pasa con los bebés,
Yes,
¿no?
that is what happens with our babies, right? They grow up and you need to adapt, right?
Exactly.
To their growth and their reality. Yes.
Exactly.
And you are thinking of making this a part of your portfolio, right? But you also want to address climate change in other African countries. Do you think that that is something that you would like to do?
Oh yes, definitely. It's not my interest in environmentalism and documenting the subject of climate change is not restricted to Nigeria alone. I want to explore other countries in Africa, other parts of the continent. I've been very much focused on the West. I would love to see what's going on in other parts of the continent, not just looking at the things that are going wrong, but what are some of the solutions that other people have found? Maybe there might be a similar community to the one you've seen in Going Under. Maybe they have a different way of approaching it. Maybe they have different methods, different techniques of dealing with flooding and rising sea levels. I would really like to explore all of that in my work as well.
Bueno, ya
Okay, so we're about to close because we don't have that much time left. But as we promised, let's see the questions from the audience. We chose one from Stefania Garcia. And we are going to put you in the position of choosing one of your babies, because the question is, which of these stories is your favorite one? That is on the one hand. And I don't know if it is the same answer, but what is the one that had the most personal effect? Estefania says that they all matter, and you love them all, but maybe one is a little bit, your favorite.
I actually don't have a favorite. Generally in my life, I'm not someone that has favorites, to be honest. But if I were to speak about the impact one of them had on me, I would speak about Gedu, because I had this conversation with my editor, Gabrielle, as well. Because doing this project, and it's not even a thing about photography itself, but it kind of impacted my thinking, the way I approach people I work with, because I'm someone that's very much on time. If it's 10 o'clock, it has to be 10 o'clock, or maybe even like 5 minutes to 10, not 10 o'clock. But working with the Komiyo and Ogayelo, the men you see in this Gedu project, it shifted my thinking and my approach to time, because they work differently. They go with natural cycles. They're not if you tell them be there at 10, like for example, the guy with the axe in the Gedu project, he would wake up in the morning, he fishes as well. He's not just a timber worker, he fishes, he does different things to kind of fend for his family. And he would say, yes, I'm going out really early. And I'm like, okay, hello, if I come here by 8 o'clock, I want to meet you here so we can get to work. And he'd be like, yes, come on, yeah, you can do that, be here. And I would get there and he's gone. He's disappeared. And without phones, without having to communicate, I just call his 10-year-old son, Ianu, where's your dad? And somehow he knows where to find his dad. Not that his dad has told him, I will be here at 9 o'clock, just by that intuition. And for me, it's at first getting there, I would get a bit, let me not say frustrated, but I'd be like, oh, you know what? I said I want to start this thing at 10 o'clock. Why haven't we started at 10 o'clock? But then as time went on, I started to shift my thinking and allow myself to go with their own flow and understand that people's perception of time is totally different. I come from a very structured perception of time, where time is linear. It's 10 o'clock, then 11 o'clock, then 12 o'clock. But for them, they approach it in a more open way. But at the end of the day, they still get things done, and they still get things done at the time that they want to get things done. So it really impacted me in terms of shifting my perspective and my approach to time, and being able to just loosen up, let up completely, and just go with the flow, take things as they are. And I think it worked out really well.
Bueno, tenemos tiempo al final para una...
We have time for one more question from the audience, because there have been many. Estudianta 74, she asked, besides this continuation of the project of the floodings, what are you working with right now? What are you working on right now?
The most recent project I have going now is actually more on the art side than the documentary side. So I'm looking to explore in Cape Verde, I'm looking to explore the history and culture of Cape Verde, and how the history of the country has impacted the forming of Cape Verdean identity. Because if you know anything about the country Cape Verde is one with a very peculiar history, where the Portuguese came and brought Africans from the mainland to the islands and enslaved them and sort of created this population of people who were meant to be indentured servants. So that's what I'm exploring now, looking at this history, how it has informed the identity of the people and how that carries on now, and what has been the response of the people to such a disruption to their lives and their history.
Muy bien, pues la verdad.
Okay, so it's been a wonderful pleasure sharing this time with you. We don't have that much time left, so I invite you to say last words and say goodbye. So the floor is yours.
I just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to the EnfocAH team and the MSF Spain team as well. It's been a real pleasure for me to share my work, to kind of have this exchange with you, Pepe, as well. Thank you for hosting it so well. And please do check out the project Tales of Women at Sea. I believe that will be shared with everybody. So thank you all and have a good evening.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Nyancho.
Okay.
Gracias.
Thank you, Nyancho. Thank you, everyone, for having been here with us. We would like to know what you think, what you thought of the meeting. So you have the YouTube chat, it is open, so you can make your comments and just give your opinion. And we invite you and encourage you again to follow this event and to our social media network. Thank you.